know you heard me on the radio flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K. I know you heard me on the radio flexing. She loved the sound of my voice, it's the best thing. Daydreaming of the jazz all day. Pick up the phone late night with Larry K.
Night Watch listeners, Night Watch viewers on YouTube, all our podcast platforms across the country. Welcome to another episode of Night Watch with Larry K. Last you heard from me, I was headed into surgery, a cardiac procedure that went well. We will see how it turns out, but I am back with you for the bye week, and I have a special treat. There's no game this week. We talked about the games. We know the state of the program. We know how I feel about it right now. We will break down the upcoming game. Can't wait for basketball season. Basketball season's coming. We're going to have a preview show. We're going to talk about basketball soon. But today, I wanted to bring you a little treat for Rutgers people you guys are plugged into, any content that's out there for Rutgers. You're plugged into all the major writers and journalists. And so I brought you one of them today, and I want to have a little bit of a different type of thing today. Instead of just talking sports, we're going to talk about this person who gave me my first into Rutgers writing and being somebody important in this community, and who I often consume his content over and over again, whether it's video-based and when he used to write. It is Aaron Breitman of the Scarlet Faithful. What's up, my brother? How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. Hopefully, you were feeling better too. And obviously, when I heard about you having surgery, I was so happy to see you back at it so quickly, and to have me as your kind of first episode since. I really appreciate that. But always great to talk to you on and offline. And thank you so much for having me.
So Aaron, let's talk about, I'm curious because I've been a consumer of your content from On the Banks even before I was a part of it. And I'm obviously an avid fan of yours now. I want to know about you, though. I mean, you constantly mention, hey, your dad worked for the university. You've been in Jersey for a very long time. Tell us about the origins of Aaron, like early childhood. Where were you born? When did you get to Jersey? What was going on with the family? What made you a Rutgers fan? Tell us.
Yeah, so I was born in North Carolina, and I moved to New Jersey right before I turned 5, specifically because my father worked in education, and he got a job at Rutgers. So that's why we relocated to New Jersey. Literally as a small child, I basically became part of the Rutgers community in the sense that, I would go to see my dad at work. He would, take us to games early on. My first kind of full season of remembrance is the 1984 Rutgers football season, which for those that remember, that was a pretty hyped up year. It was the first year of Dick Anderson, the former longtime Joe Paterno assistant at Penn State. They went 7-3. And, I laugh now because way back then, I remember as a kid, all the talk about Rutgers is going big time now, and they're going to become a national power. And so here we are 4 decades later, still talking about that possibility. But so that really was my introduction to Rutgers, and all through growing up, childhood, into high school and everything. I mean, I've gone to countless Rutgers games. I mean, I used to go to the soccer games when they had Alexi Lalas and Peter Vermes, and they were a national contender. They went to the national title game. Rutgers hosted 1989. They hosted the Final Four for soccer. It was like minus 20 degrees for the championship. I was at the only scoreless NCAA soccer championship ever at Rutgers Stadium. And they had changed the overtime rule the year before, and it ended in a tie. So it was the only tie in men's soccer history. And then the next year they changed the rule back. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, so I used to go to a lot of soccer, basketball, obviously football as well. But yeah, it's in my blood. And, I think it helps me in a way that I have a different perspective, or a unique perspective, and kind of I grew up into it. And, it's not really a choice. It's just part of who I am. And going to Rutgers now, although I am able to get to games a lot less, with a full career, a family, living over an hour away, it's just one of those things that it's home. And whenever I'm there, it's just this feeling of it's a comfortable, just warm feeling, whether, things are happening positively on the field or not. It's almost comforting when it's not because I'm used to it. And, so many times through the years, and then obviously I became a student. I graduated from Rutgers. Football went 8-36 my 4 years there, from 96 to I graduated in 2000. And have gone to a ton of memorable football, basketball games. We could talk about that. But yeah, so, I went from growing up as a kid, always kind of wanting to go there, considering some other schools. And ultimately it was like, at the end of the day, it was always that choice to go there. And but my parents were cool. They let me kind of come to that realization. I could go tuition free because my father worked there. So they never pressured me. It was like, I just kind of had to come to that decision. And that's always the best way when it happens kind of naturally like that. And, it's the best decision I ever made. I have lifelong friends, from that experience. And, it's just being connected to Rutgers. Like I said, it's like I don't have my childhood home anymore, but I have Rutgers.
Yes,
and it kind of, that's what it feels like to me when I go back, whether it's the RAC, SHI Stadium, or just being on campus.
So did you grow up nearby, I'm guessing? Like your father worked there. So first of all, do you believe in Central Jersey? And then I'll ask you if you're from Central Jersey, if you believe in it.
Yes to both. I grew up in West Windsor, which is about 30 minutes away from Rutgers. Route 1 was my way. So it was right next door to Princeton. Actually, when I went to Rutgers, I worked in food service. I always have. And I worked for, at Princeton University when I went to Rutgers. So that was my second kind of restaurant job at Rutgers. But so very quick drive. So I was able to, obviously see the family a lot. That was part of it. But, Rutgers is like a whole nother world too. So when you're there, you could be 500 miles away, not just, 25 or whatever it was. But yeah, Central Jersey guy. And I've always believed in it. And so happy to represent that portion of the fan base.
And I love Route 1. I know there's a lot of lights and whatever, but I'll drive all the way from New Brunswick to Newark regularly. I don't know what it is about that Route 1 old corridor that gives you that old Jersey feel. And are you one of those people then, if you believe in Central Jersey and you grew up near Princeton, do you include then Trenton as part of Central Jersey? That's all the same, the Shore, Trenton, it's all?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, back in the day, that's when Trenton had Chambersburg, which was a huge restaurant scene at the time. So like Di Lorenzo's, which is obviously a famous pizza place. I mean, I grew up going to the Chambersburg location. They didn't have the Robbinsville location. So like we would go to, Di Lorenzo's for dinner on a Friday night, like when I was, 5 to 15. So very much like, going to Rutgers games, going to Trenton for dinner. Rossi's was an unbelievable burger place in Chambersburg. So we used to go there quite a bit. And that was the nice thing about Central. Like you really are Mercer County, like you're 15 minutes away from kind of everything. So, and that's kind of like where I live now in North Jersey. I'm 15 minutes away from so many different diverse towns. So it's similar in that regard. North Jersey, Central Jersey, very different for sure. But so I grew up in that experience. So that definitely is kind of part of my overall childhood as much as Rutgers as well.
Makes a lot of sense. Really, really interesting. And when you see it from different angles, because I was from Monmouth County, so it's like the other side, same distance to New Brunswick, pretty much. I was in Freehold, but different side of the east-west line. So, so you were more Trenton, I was more the Shore. So interesting experiences there, not far from each other. So now you take me through. So you go to Rutgers, you grow up a Rutgers fan. Before we get into your career, actually, let's talk about when you said there was this sentiment around the program and around the university that Rutgers was going big time. Was this something that was, insular to the hardcore sports fans? Was this a university-wide phenomenon? Were there, at that time, faculty members who were kind of skeptical of it? Or was this a joyous time? I mean, take us into what it was like at that time, where the buzz was, we are going to go big time. And obviously Rutgers was, for a long part of its history, and you know better than I do, you were around the university before me, there was Rutgers competed in this kind of Northeastern thing that wasn't really trying to go big time. And then they made a decision to go big time. What was it like at that time? And based on what was it kicking and screaming? Was it a concerted effort? Was it exciting? What was it like around that time?
Yeah, so it really wasn't a whole lot different in what I remember, in the sense of it was kind of a mixed feeling. There were certain administration members, faculty, non-academic faculty that wanted to go big time. And there was kind of this belief that that's where it was going. Hiring Dick Anderson was kind of considered a coup back then, getting a paternal assistant. Rutgers was constantly trying to, I don't want to say be like Penn State, but they were trying to align with Penn State. And, there's that famous story that's been reported on about Paterno kind of promising Rutgers to be in this all football conference. That fell apart. Rutgers kind of had egg on its face. And then ultimately that led to the Big East about a decade later. But, in hiring Dick Anderson, that was kind of the belief that, okay, this is our path towards becoming a legitimate, kind of power program. Rutgers was still, I've gone to Rutgers Colgate football games, so I remember that.
Right.
And then in the mid 80s, they started playing games at the Meadowlands, kind of mixed in. They would have 1 or 2 games a year in the Meadowlands, usually against what we now call a Power 5 opponent, non-conference. I remember Duke. I remember they would play Penn State there. So, they were definitely trying to grow the brand and become more of a kind of national institution as a program. But yeah, the academics was always the academics. It was always kind of where Rutgers were more of an Ivy League school. This is what we should be. So there was always that internal struggle. I remember that, as a kid and just talking to my dad over the years and kind of seeing administrators talk about stuff. But it was always the non-academic faculty, wanting to really go big time. And, you also had faculty members they hired that, I remember my dad's buddy, he came from the SEC and like they came from these other programs where it's like, we can make Rutgers that. And, as we've seen, it's always 1 step forward, 2 steps back at times. Talking about memories, I remember my father had to stay late that night when, Rutgers was beating UMass when they were number 1 in the country at the RAC, and there was a protest at halftime and they shut the game down. Like, if you think about that, nowadays, if that happened 30 years later, you're playing the number 1 team in the country, you have a 1-point lead, and there's a student protest on the court that shut it down. So there was always kind of athletics was certainly appreciated, and there was a hardcore fan base back then, but it was also never the thing, it was never the number 1 thing. So, people have opinions about the ADs over the years, and, it's always kind of mixed. And there's good and bad in everything in terms of former administrators and all that. But there's always been a lot of, the RU screw is not new. The politics is not new. This is, a huge university. I love it dearly, but there's always been kind of a pull to different directions and never been to play off the alma mater, upstream red team. It's never been actually that in terms of the inner workings of the university, unfortunately.
Now, within the athletic department, even, or with the people that did care more about sports, was there that same sense of pride and tradition? Rutgers goes all the way back, we know, to the first college football game played, and then they had mixed results, but they had really memorable seasons in the 70s, and they're still Paul Robeson, a proud old school. Did they have that pride like you see maybe in some of the Ivies as opposed to the big state schools, or was it always kind of not, did they not make a push to acknowledge that until we went big time? Like, was it there or no?
Yeah, honestly, it was, if you go back and look at the football schedules of the 70s and really the 80s, you can see the conflict in the schedule where they're playing Colgate, they're playing Lehigh, and then they're playing Penn State, West Virginia. Again, there wasn't a conference then. So for Rutgers to play those schools, there's an actual, obviously a natural tie to playing those Eastern schools. But, they very much, the week-to-week shift in terms of the level of program they were playing was very diverse in terms of small time, big time. So it was never fully one or the other. And, listen, you even played, Tennessee, Alabama in the late 70s, early 80s. You're going down to the ACC, and then you're playing these what are now like Patriot level schools. So it was kind of bizarre. And it always felt like, okay, we're moving away from the smaller time. We're going big, but there was certainly as many, there's still detractors today that say, we shouldn't be in the Big Ten. We should be an academic school, be a D3. People say D3 or Patriot League or Ivy League or whatever. That's always been there from when I remember, way back when. So, it's always been kind of a mix and match, but you definitely saw Rutgers kind of struggle with what their identity is. And they always want, I think the decision makers in athletics for sure always wanted to be in the big time. And ultimately that won out. But I think that honestly, the historical roots of that give some explanation as to why Rutgers was so far behind going to the Big Ten, and still to this day, have some struggles in terms of getting to that level they need to be to really be as competitive as we hope in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and you segued perfectly, because that was going to be my next question. I mean, my next question was going to be, do you think some of that, stop and start, trying to find an identity and conflicted identity contributes to Rutgers, lagging behind some of these schools? I think you answered the question was yes. I mean, if you look at the Northeast in general, you have what? Syracuse, you have Penn State, who Penn State right away where Penn State, the state university, were going all in. And then other than that, I mean, UConn, some stops and starts, other than that, the Northeast, these football programs, because I think there's so many smaller schools with their personal identities as opposed to these large land grant state institutions, it's almost an anomaly sometimes. So I think it makes sense, but it can be frustrating. Let's talk about you now and move into something. You go to Rutgers, you graduate Rutgers, you have a career path. At what point did you start, getting into the press box, for lack, start writing about Rutgers sports? Tell us about, when did you decide to do it? How did you get into it? Just the very early origins, and we'll kind of go through it with more questions. But you graduated, or was it before then? When did you start writing about it?
Yeah, so, it was honestly one of those things that was always kind of a pipe dream. My really only regret being a student at Rutgers is that I didn't get involved with WRSU or the Targum. I just didn't get involved in that. And it was something I always kind of regretted over the years. And, it was always kind of a pipe dream. Like, I feel like I could have been good, like as a sports writer or, in sports radio or whatever. And that was the great thing about SB Nation, is they kind of changed the game and gave real fans an outlet to be able to, kind of live out that dream a little bit. And I remember, I read on the banks for a few years before I even, got involved with them. And I remember they had posted that they were looking for writers. I kind of just took a shot, got picked.
When was this?
Not that it was a, hard selection. It was more or less, if you want to dedicate your time, it was all volunteer based, go for it. And ironically, someone who's become a good friend over the years, Dave White, it was right at the time where his kind of, author, being a full-time author or a successful author, was taking off. He was kind of the Rutgers basketball guy. And within like a week of being involved with On the Banks, so like, we needed someone new to kind of take over basketball. And I was very quick to raise my hand there, and it was a natural fit. I played basketball, in high school. And so I've been around the game a long time. So, and I've been a Rutgers basketball fan just as long as Rutgers football. So that kind of helped. And then 3 months into being there, the editor left, and they were looking for a new editor. This was now summer of 2015. And, I'm my career, I'm in the restaurant business. I've worked countless restaurants, bars. I worked for a restaurant company in New York City full-time, managing an operation for a full-time client. So, I've done that for 25 years now. I guess about 20. And at any rate, this was kind of like just a side project, something to kind of entertain my own interests. And obviously it being Rutgers made it the most meaningful. And so I was like, you know what, I'm not going to get this, but I'll just try for it. And I remember the SB Nation manager at the time, and he called me and he's like, well, you don't have any experience doing this, but we love your passion, and we're going to go with you over someone more experienced, because we think that the passion that you have will kind of translate better. So they took a shot on me, and we really, in the 7 years I was there, grew it quite a bit, just in terms of reach and the views we were getting, and just kind of establishing credibility as, even though we're fans, right? We're credible in our opinions, we're professional in our opinions, and that was really big for me. And no fault to Rutgers, but they were very leery of me, right, and On the Banks at first. And we could kind of talk how that process changed, but that was kind of the breakthrough for me. And it just became a side hustle, but also just total passion project. And it was really the thing that's been kind of the best in terms of the most rewarding is just connecting with fans the way I have, and having fans reach out to me, and when a fan writes to me and says, you know what, you put it perfectly, that's exactly how I felt, but I didn't realize it till you said it. Like that to me is the highest compliment, and it really has been an honor to kind of be out a representative of the fan base, whether willingly or not, and but it's kind of happened that way, and it's been a lot of fun. And obviously I've transitioned since in terms of my personal life, just obviously my career, family, all that. But
we'll get to that too. So I want to ask you too, now going back to SB Nation, you kind of answered the call like I did to you, which is, hey, you submit it, you start writing, and then you become the editor. I've seen some SB Nation affiliated sites that, you can tell it's completely, fan content. And then I've seen other SB Nation where it's legitimately, it's a publication, it's a press publication, which is what On the Banks became under your leadership. When you got that position, did you make a conscious decision upon getting it? Like, look, I'm going to take this in a direction that's going to establish us as a legitimate, outlet of the press. Or did it kind of happen gradually as you were going through writing? How did that go over with the other, people that were writing for it? How did that go over with SB Nation's management? Just give us some insight into that, because you're making a huge transition from fan who's writing to the leader and editor of a, respected Rutgers publication, regardless of its, where it came from or what SB Nation was geared to do. Take us inside that process a little bit, your thought process and how it was getting that credibility, and you can include what it was like trying to get, Rutgers to give you that press pass and to acknowledge you in that way. Because I think what we're seeing in sports journalism right now in general, and you see some of the unfortunate things going on with papers and print editions and things, and even my own ascension, you're seeing a transition in sports journalism in a lot of ways. And I think there's a healthy balance between, you may start off as a fan, but you got to quickly get professional. Otherwise, you're always going to be just a fan podcast. And there are differences. You can see the delineation with a lot of teams, a lot of schools. I'm really curious about the nuts and bolts of this, because I think your guidance of On the Banks really coincides with this grander trend we're seeing in sports journalism. And I think it's an important thing to talk about. So get into that a bit.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. SB Nation was definitely making a conscious choice for the college network to try to make it more professional. And, the leaders at the time, Matt Brown was my head kind of manager for SB Nation. He's gone on to, he has his own professional newsletter. He's been really big in the NIL space, and also kind of covering, college changes in athletics, all the way down to D3. He's got a great newsletter. You can look him up, Matt Brown. He's great. But he provided a lot of guidance. And with Rutgers, rightfully so, like I understood their kind of trepidation with this change. And like, it was back then where I couldn't even get approval to use like a photo for an Olympic sport. Like if I was right.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. Like I always approached it as, okay, this can't just be football and basketball. We should cover everything. Obviously, we're not going to cover everything as in depth, but if women's soccer is going to the Final Four, like we need to cover that. If men's lacrosse is doing that as well, we need to cover that. So, and what I found was I got deeper into the Rutgers fan base of seeing how many people actually cared, and there's a tangible kind of relation to that. You could see, wow, we got X amount of views on this women's soccer article in a Thursday. That's resonating with people. So obviously, it was kind of navigating through that, but also showing Rutgers that we were willing to cover everything, that we actually cared, because you're not gonna take whatever time it takes to write up a field hockey game recap if you're looking to just be negative, or just not be I guess represent them in a good way. So yeah, I couldn't even get approval for photos. What really changed was totally random luck. I got an email. It was an email from the ticket office. And I've told this story before, but not in a long time. And probably not a lot of people know it. So I got a random email from the ticket office. This was when the Ash era started. And it was basically the ticket office telling me how I could purchase season tickets and upsell them to other fan bases. So when Ohio State came, I could probably turn my ticket value around. Mm-hmm. And I forget exactly how it was worded, but it was extremely inappropriate. and definitely not in the spirit of what I thought that Pat Hobbs and Rutgers really wanted. And I know sometimes these ticket agencies are third parties or, vendors. So at any rate, I wrote about it because that's what I knew what to do. And I had no real relationship with Rutgers yet. I mean, I had tried, but like I said, I wasn't even getting approval for photos. So I wrote about it, and I'll never forget that day. It really created a little bit of a firestorm. I remember someone it was either Rivals or 24/7. They were like, yeah, I was on the phone with the ticket office and I heard a manager yelling in the background, we have to have an emergency meeting. And I actually got a response from Rutgers Athletics. They reached out to me proactively. Pat Hobbs sent me a statement to use and said it wasn't, I remember it was something in the fact that this isn't in the ethos of the Rutgers Athletic Department. It's not what we're, wanting to do, and this will be addressed, blah, blah, blah. So it was almost, and I remember getting criticized back then by people like, why didn't you go to the Rutgers? Why did you make this a big deal? It's like, well, I didn't have that relationship. They weren't really, this was my kind of opportunity to say, hey, this is my take on something Rutgers is doing that I don't think is right. And kind of laid it out there. And that got me credibility with Rutgers. They started to take me seriously for the first time. So that was a lesson in terms of, I'm not looking to take shots or anything like that. But at the same time, I need to be, it still bothers me when I still get it. People call me a fanboy or a homer or whatever, but I'm comfortable with, over the years, I've been critical when I think it's appropriate. And I think that in terms of what you're talking about, being a fan, but being professional, that's always been the line I've tried to stay on, is that, yes, I'm going to be probably more optimistic about certain things than other people because I am a fan. But at the same time, I also have seen things go wrong before. And I think that I've been critical at the right time. So it's been a balancing act. But yeah, so that really led to that relationship. And then we could talk more kind of just about how doors open with football and basketball. But that was the start in terms of when Rutgers kind of actually acknowledged me. And then that kind of opened the door for On the Banks to kind of capitalize off of that. And I think it was just our consistency in covering all the teams and just being objective in our coverage.
And so I want to ask you how you got, the actual access in a second. I mean, that's how it happened. But, you referenced that you just wrote something and it caught fire, and therefore, they had to acknowledge it and talk to you. And I think that's kind of speaking to the fact that, behind the scenes, is there really a difference in the general public when eyes are on an article, whether it's derived from traditional newspaper that's 150 years old, or whether it's derived from somebody writing it for SB Nation? The answer is there's not. I mean, eyes are eyes and publicity is publicity. But one of the things I noticed when I was writing for you, and I remember there was the whole 9/11 controversy, like with the helmets that Rutgers was wearing or whatnot, or the pat. And I wanted to write about it. And you were like, hey, you can write about it, but I'm not going to promise you that it's going to get published because I don't want this to be an acknowledgement of something, that we really shouldn't be acknowledging, and kind of a fan take against it. I artfully constructed it and you liked it and we did publish it. Yep. But I remember those sessions with you, and it was a lot of professionalism and a lot of, we had freedom writing with you as the editor, but there was also a quality control aspect to it, and a legitimate assurance that this publication, just having eyes on it wasn't good enough. We also had to reciprocate by responsibly reporting. How important is that going to be as we enter this brave new world where, yes, eyes are going to be on a big podcast, or eyes are going to be on a guy who writes wherever, but you still need some semblance of editorial integrity. And we lose some of that with the hierarchies and bureaucracies of traditional mediums. I guess I think I already know your answer, that the onus, how much of an onus is on people like us who do this? And B, are you encouraged that that's going to continue to happen, that people like you are going to continue to be at the helm of these things? Or are you worried that without people like you who have that moral compass, things can kind of go off the rails? And then what do schools and teams play in that? I mean, they can give people access or not. Just your take on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it kind of depends on what your platform is, right? So if you're completely independent, I mean, you can do whatever you want, right? It's a free world, free press. So, but when, like, I also, under SB Nation, like, they did give me good guidance, and there were certain policies, in terms of there were certain controversial things that would happen, not specific to Rutgers, but just in the world of sports where, if there was arrest per se, right? You had to get that vetted by legal to make sure that you didn't say anything inappropriate or, not inappropriate in the sense of, it was more of just, you didn't get yourself in trouble by maybe, allegations versus this happened, whatever. But the Syracuse thing you bring up, that's funny because I remember the SB Nation Syracuse guy that wrote all that, he's reaching out to me asking for help, oh, can you, kind of help put out this fire? And I was like, nobody, you stepped into it. Like, that was your opinion. You like, what were you expecting? Like, you wanted this attention, you wanted the clicks, but then now you can't deal with the heat. And that was I was always aware of that. And, I had a couple instances where I had contributors and they wrote certain things. And I at first glance, I didn't really think it was, it wasn't ever inappropriate, but I didn't think it was inflammatory where other fan bases then interpreted it that way. And it became a kind of a storm that I had to deal with, whether it was on social media or not. So that was definitely eye-opening at times. And I learned to kind of, how to avoid those situations. That was like my one rule on the Banks was, you can write whatever you want, but tell me beforehand if you're going to write something that might be, a little questionable, because I'll tell you either, yes, go for it, but we'll review it, or no, I don't think that's a subject we're going to touch. And that was a perfect example. You told me and I was like, well, give it your best shot and let's see how it comes out. You handled it great. I love that article. And honestly, the most read article we ever had was Scott Logan, who is up for Rutgers Fan Hall of Fame vote right now, by the way. Shout out to Scott. He was original member of the Riot Squad, and he wrote an article basically saying, like, fans need to stop doing the F Penn State chant. And that got like, it went viral. Penn State fans, it got like 50,000 views in like a week. And it was crazy. But again, it was touching kind of a, touchy subject. But we took a stance on it and it came out, and it was the most read thing we ever published there in my whole time. So not even something I wrote. But wow. So, yeah, there were lots of things we published that I didn't necessarily, and not that I agreed with what you wrote and what Scott wrote, but there were other takes, even just like kind of football takes, maybe, or basketball takes, I didn't necessarily agree with personally, but I thought it was important for us to kind of cover all views too. So it was more of just, okay, making sure this is done the best way. If you have an opinion, great, but back it up with logic, make it make sense, make it be professional, and then be able to like stand by it when you get a little heat for it. So as long as I felt that was in place, we did that. So I think nowadays it really depends on the organization or the platform you have. There's a ton of independent people now, which is awesome. But I think, yes, you have to be careful and you have to be responsible in what you're reporting. And, also I'm a big believer in credit. So I always cited the beat guys, and, they always pay, were very good to me because of that. Because, I'm not in this to break news. I'm not in this to, be the story. I'm in this to kind of live the moment as it's happening as a fan and give my take. And, it's surreal at times. And I sometimes it's weird to even know that I went to, people like know who I am. I'm still like kind of sheltered, I'm in front of a camera doing this, and it's like, then I turn it off, I publish it, that's it. So it is surreal still to this day. Even when I get comments online, sometimes I'm human, they do get to me at times. So it's been an interesting experience, but from that perspective, yeah, that was always my approach, is I don't have to agree with it, but as long as it's, in the line of appropriateness, we'll go for it.
It makes sense. And I think that's a big thing these days, is like, people in positions of power, is you have a certain duty. Like as an editor, it's got to be making sure the quality's there, but not necessarily, editorializing somebody's opinion or position. And there's other things, like I've worked in curating art, and it's like, I may not agree specifically with this, but if the art itself is good, even if the message isn't my personal cause, that's okay. My job here is to curate good art. Your job was to curate good writing and good reporting, not necessarily to check people's opinions. I think the world could use a bigger dose of people doing their jobs in that way. So that's great stuff. Tell me about when you first, like, what was your, I know that article you wrote, you get reached out to by the athletic department. What was your like aha moment? Like, I have arrived, like as far as access, whether it's football or basketball, like where you're in the asking a question or somebody knows who you are, who's like a figure that we know. Tell us about that moment and what did it feel like? I get stopped at the stadium sometimes, and like you said, I'm like, okay, but I was just here at the game. I'm a fan. It's cool. I like it. I'm not gonna lie and say I don't, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. I have this video that's been seen by all these people. But within the athletic department, that's something I'm a ways from. Tell us about your first moment where you're like, wow, like I'm one of the press guys. Like I'm in here.
Yeah, so SB Nation certainly helped open that door, and I was able to get credentialed for Big Ten Basketball Media Day, the first one with Peichel, his first year. It was in DC. So, now they're pretty much all Midwest, but the first 2 years they were DC and New York. So I went to the first one in DC. I had no access to the program at that point, and it was one of those settings. So I was able to ask I have the picture, I think it's on my Facebook and Instagram, but where it was a BTN screenshot. I have a microphone asking the question to him at the podium. That was surreal. And then afterwards, you have like these breakout sessions, and you basically just go table to table. The coaches are there, and kind of just plop down, and you can start talking to them. And it's still on, I think, on the bank's Facebook feed. But I basically sat down and had pretty close to a one-on-one interview with Peichel for like 10, 15 minutes, and was just going through a bunch of stuff with him. And I remember I rode the Acela back to New York, and I wrote this big article and posted that video, and it certainly got a lot of attention. And pretty much overnight, basketball opened their doors to me. Steve Peichel, to his credit, he said what it got relayed back to me was, well, you're going to cover us no matter what, so we might as well allow you to have access to the program. But that was Steve Peichel. Like he always talked about at Stony Brook building a community, and he understood the value really early that like someone like me and our on the banks, like it's a good thing to have us cover the basketball program in depth, because it just builds the message. It builds it gets obviously attention to the program. And he was starting from the bottom, so he needed as much coverage as possible. And obviously, I had an optimistic approach as a longtime fan and knowing of his background. So that really was it. A month later, I'm at Rutgers Media Day for the program, and I got credentialed, and it kind of took off from there. It helped me build credibility with the rest of the athletic department. I started to build relationships with all the media communications contacts for all the teams. It was also me being proactive, saying, hey, can I interview the field hockey coach? Can I interview lacrosse? And obviously those programs were starving for attention, so I was giving them an outlet as well, and it kind of just built from there. And then when I did have a little bit of access when Ash was there at football. I made it to a media day. I was able to go to games if I wanted to, not that I had a lot of time. But then it was when Shiano came back, and I really got kind of that full-time credential. And I obviously I don't write anymore, so I'm not fully credentialed anymore. But if I want to go to a game, I mean, I've had access. I get players on the podcast all the time. I've had Shiano on too. So I have a really good relationship with those communications people still. And Shiano kind of helped open that door for me and showed me that respect. So it just built over time. It was a long process. And it was something that I took very seriously and kind of cultivated over the years, and still cultivate in terms of just making sure that I have good relationships. It doesn't mean, everybody who watches me regularly know I can be critical, but it's also, being fair, I think, too. So it's not just a matter of getting, I've never believed in clickbait or, just a crazy take just to get attention. It's got to make sense in terms of the context of the coverage and what's actually happening. So, you're talking to someone that within a month of covering Rutgers for the first time ever, you had all the Kyle Flood season and then the Julie Herman hiring. All within literally, I was, thrown into the fire. I had no idea what I was doing. And so that was my kind of indoctrination to covering Rutgers, which did coincide a little bit with just my childhood of knowing the history of Rutgers. It just kind of fit. So I think that actually was an advantage for me. But it's obviously grown from there.
And then you mentioned that, you don't write as much anymore, but writing in general, we talk about being a Rutgers fan. We talk about covering sports. We know you grew up a fan. We know you're interested in Rutgers sports, but the writing side of it, have you always been interested in writing? Because, or was it just, did that come as a derivative because you wanted to get involved more with the sports scene of Rutgers? Or were you always kind of into writing in other mediums or other ways and it translated easily?
I was always, I was a double major at Rutgers, philosophy and poli sci. So I was always a paper guy over standardized tests. I wasn't the best at standardized tests, but I could write a paper. And philosophy, a little bit of a brag there. They were the #2 philosophy department. I think they still are.
I was just gonna say, like, that's challenging. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So that was certainly that I think cultivated my ability to write. Although I hated expos and that was really bad. But philosophy, you're making arguments, and I think that looking back on it, that really kind of was my first step in writing about Rutgers sports, and that helped me kind of develop that style. So I definitely harken back to that, and it was always kind of more natural for me. My mom's an English teacher, so. Even though ironically I was more naturally better with math and everything, I think it was just one of those things over time that, but getting involved with SB Nation, I mean, even back then in 2015, I mean, the medium of podcasts and video, like that really wasn't a thing yet. It was, you wrote.
Right.
So that was kind of the platform that was there. And I jumped on that. So it was more of just kind of like, that's what's available. But also it was something that I felt comfortable with, and it took a while, but I really was able to kind of, be a lot more efficient as a writer over the years, and talking about editing, and, it was a lot, and it got really big. And then I had the opportunity to kind of do my own thing.
And is that kind of what fed into now the transition? Tell us about, obviously there's a rise of video mediums, and you've made a transition. So tell us about the transition. What triggered it? What got you here, and how's it going so far? And obviously people know who you are, but plug it anyway. Your new platform, and what the outlook is, and things like that too.
Yeah, no. So I was able to build a relationship with Ant Wright, who's a pretty big kind of personality, I guess you would say, for college basketball and social media, and has a pretty big YouTube following. And he played at Michigan, and is pretty well respected out there. And so we used to collaborate a lot on Rutgers, Michigan stuff, football, basketball. So he had this idea to kind of create his own college network, kind of a competitor to SB Nation. And he reached out to me, and I was actually the first site that kind of signed on with him. We were partners together, and it was a great experience. I always intended going into it. I knew the podcast was important. I started the podcast at On the Banks. Lance Glenn was the guy that I brought on, who did a great job, and he does that professionally now in a different industry. But so I believed in the podcast. I knew its reach, and I wanted to grow that at my own site. And but also, I wanted to do it myself. The editing of having volunteers, and it's a hard process. And I was blessed. There was a lot of great writers like yourself that signed up, but at the same time, it was kind of taking the fun out of it. And it was a lot of editing, and it was taking away from what I wanted to write. So when I did my own thing, I was like, I know I'm probably not going to max out on views and everything by not having a team around me, but I'm just going to do it my way and just have it my voice, and whatever it is, it is. And it was just it was more the business side that kind of caught up with me, just in terms of technical things with sites working right, web and having any types of technical issues there, spam, advertise. It was a lot of things that I never really had to deal with before, that you have the kind of benefit of when you write for an SB Nation. All of that is taken care of. They have that corporate and kind of end complete, where I'm completely doing this on my own with a partner, and we're learning on the fly, and then just keeping up in terms of I'm very hard on myself, and I want to be as thorough as possible and as good as possible. So it was just the point where I was writing till midnight every night. I get up at 4:15 for work every day. I commute to the city full time, 5 days a week. I have 2 young kids, and it was just it's just not worth it. And it's not good for my health. It's not good for my family. And it didn't quite take off the way I wanted it to. But I had developed kind of an outlet in this podcast, and it felt natural. I had gotten better at it, I felt. And it was like, this is a perfect way to kind of stay relevant, have a voice, but have a life too, and not be so consumed by it. And that was kind of the natural break. So, and it was great. Just in terms of that transition, I was able to keep the name. And so the Scarlet Faithful podcast exists. And, I'm a little bit of a sicko. I still do kind of a daily podcast, but it's I do less prep than I think people think I do. It's just a lot of it's from kind of the gut, and I obviously do more research for certain episodes than others. But at the same time, it's just about kind of it's almost like an internal dialogue with myself. Sometimes I feel like Will Ferrell in Old School when he spits all that stuff out and the debate. And he blacks out and he's like, what happened? I mean, there's episodes I'm like, I don't even know what I said. And now that I go through and edit a little bit more, I'll watch myself and make sure, I'm happy with what I'm putting out. But it's very much an instinctual kind of just natural thing. And I think that does help kind of set me apart. But listen, I have an advantage from the mainstream media because I don't have editors. I don't, and while I want to have good relationships with Rutgers, I'm not bound to certain kind of like ties where if my access gets cut off tomorrow, I can still do what I do. I can still recap a game from home. I can, and believe me, I don't mean that in a negative way. Like I want to have great relationships with Rutgers always. And I think I do. And I prioritize that. But at the same time, I have fan perspective from over the years. But I treat it in a way that, like you said, I try to be professional in doing so also. So I think it's a little bit of a balance that's different, and it's really kind of helped me. And I've been blessed with growing a following that I have on Twitter, on YouTube, and it's been a very rewarding experience so far, just with how many fans have reached out to me and just been very complimentary.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, one of the things you mentioned before about just kind of having respect for the guys that are full-time journalists and whatnot, we all have respect for that. It's a little bit of a different hustle that we do. And it's funny, like you doing almost a daily show, like after the UCLA game, I think it was, I'm like, where's Aaron? I want to listen to you. I want to listen to somebody, and you're reliable. So I can always go to you. I'm like, and you were a couple hours late and you were like, I decompressed. I was like, where is he? I want to hear his take now because I'm mad. I want to hear other people, but I'm not going to listen to myself. I heard Richie, I heard them. Now where's Aaron? And it's funny because you are consistent. Like I can almost always, if there's something Rutgers I'm interested in or something that recently happened and I want analysis and a take on it, I know I can go to your site and get it. So it's true. Let's wrap up. Well, we'll not wrap up, but let's kind of dig into some sports related stuff. Like, what's your favorite Rutgers athletics memory as a fan?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been at probably the most memorable football and basketball games over the years in terms of, so I was at the 1989 Atlanta 10 championship game at the Rack. It's generally considered the craziest the Rack ever was. I sat in section 118 right under the basket. As a kid, your perspective's a little different. I was 15 at the time, 14, 15. I remember I still have the memory of my ears ringing and it being crazy and the court storm and all that. And that was an unbelievable memory. Old school New Brunswick. I remember going to Bennigan's for dinner the night before. So old school fans remember Bennigan's.
Yes.
So I remember that part of it. But that was crazy. And then I was lucky to go to the 2006 Louisville game. I sat first row, basically like 50-yard line, second deck. And I'll never forget, I elbowed. I think it was when Rice scored that last touchdown. And I basically turned and I elbowed into a girl next to me and she hit the railing. And I pulled her back in, and I was like, "Wow!" I almost went to jail for, knocking a fan over to a fall to the first floor. So that was fortunate not happening. But yeah, that whole experience was just wild. But those two games certainly stick out. I mean, I was at the *98 Madison Square Garden when Billett hit the buzzer beater. First and last time I ever high-fived a UConn fan who was very happy that, we won that game. We knocked off Georgetown. But I was right there for that. My senior, my parents asked me, kind of like a graduation gift. What do you want? I got tickets to the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. That's what I wanted. So that's how much of a sicko I am and Rutgers, of course, lost the first game to Notre Dame. But yeah, so, I mean, those games jump out for sure. There was a kind of a, and some people, I wrote about it in the past, but there's one experience I had as a fan that's kind of unique, I think. So I worked in Boston early 2000s, and I worked in the bar business then. And Thanksgiving night, the night before Thanksgiving, those of you that know, I mean, that's the craziest night in the industry. My family had gone through a rough time. I wanted to surprise my mom, and it just so happened Rutgers was playing UConn at 11 a.m. on Thanksgiving Day. This is 2004. So I have this grand plan. Okay, I'm working till like 3 a.m. How am I going to make it down to Thanksgiving? But also, if I'm going to go down, why not tailgate with my friends first and then go to Thanksgiving dinner with my mom? So I had this cabbie. I worked in Southie. I lived in Beacon Hill, and a new sports bar. It was really popular. It was crazy. And so I had this kind of regular cabbie that would drive me home at night, like 3 a.m. And I remember asking him one night. So I looked, there's no trains, there's no planes, there's no way to get home. Yep. So I just off the cuff, this is before Uber, this is before all that. And I said, hey, would you maybe drive me to New Jersey, in the middle of the night, and I'll pay you, whatever. And he was like, yeah, I'll do that. No problem. So I remember I went home. He picked me up at like 3:30 in the morning, and you don't realize the difference in this is an old school Boston cab, the bucket seats. When you're on the highway, I'm like literally like sunken. You're feeling everything. I remember, there's this loud noise, and I'm like, what's going on? He's like, oh, that's the restrictor plate. I don't have it on the engine anymore. So you're like in a jet engine bomber. This is 4 a.m. And then I see he's got the steering wheel all the way to the left. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, the alignment's kind of off. So, I got to hold it this way. So
you don't think about it when you're going around town.
I'm literally like, am I going to live to be at this tailgate? And so we get to Rutgers. I kid you not. He drives up to the stadium. Rutgers police stops us. And the cabbie says, listen, I drove this guy from Boston. He's a big fan. I got to get to the stadium. And the guy gets on his radio and he's like, hey, Captain, you're not going to believe this, but I got a Boston cab here. They got this guy, blah, 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 blah. Next thing you know, they said yes. He drives me right up. It literally drops me off at the stadium. And my friend's tailgate was right there. They lost to UConn that day. It was like 42-35 or something. I had gone to the Michigan State game earlier that season from Boston when they beat that huge upset. So I wanted to be there at the end. They lost. They had a losing season, but that season was kind of the start of Schiano 1.0, where we started to believe. So to be there for that tailgate was a lot of fun, and then obviously surprised my mom. But that whole experience was wild, and that was probably the craziest thing I ever did as a Rutgers fan.
That's awesome. So let's talk about before we wrap up here. Let's talk about very briefly. I want to touch on football just right now. I listened to your kind of state of the program thing and your thoughts, but we got 4 games left in this season, November. Going into the season, one might have thought, and I certainly did, that this might have been a stretch that would have been advantageous for Rutgers. As the season's gone on, it's looked like, we've had some attrition. We've had some issues. We're not going to belabor them. The other teams, some of them have done quite well. There's pros and cons. What do you think generally? What are you feeling? Is this a 2-2 stretch? Is this a 1-3 stretch? Is this I really don't know. I almost am looking at like a 1-3. I hope not. I think if they start off well against Minnesota, it could very well be 2-2. If they figure something out over the bye week, get to a bowl game, that's what I want to see. But what is your gut feeling about this program? You and I have plenty of time to collab again, talk about next year, all this. What do you think about this last stretch?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, my gut take is I have no idea. I think that it could go a lot of different ways. I do think when you're a program that has less talent than kind of the Blue Bloods, I think momentum is more important than for those teams, to be honest with you. So I feel like we've seen Rutgers kind of fall victim to negative momentum where they almost can't get out of their own way, and it just snowballs pretty quick. I actually projected when we did the collaboration for the season, I said they'd start 4-4.
You did.
But I didn't see it happening this way. I thought they were going to have a few really, really close losses, that they were really close to getting over the hump, that they were kind of getting healthier as the season progressed. And then after this bye, they would take off in November and run the table. That's what I picked. Obviously, it doesn't look very good for that to happen right now. But I think obviously this Minnesota game is going to be huge. You have a lot of, history there with all the coaches and Callie McManus. And so I think my thing is, if Rutgers can't get up for this game emotionally, then that's a really bad sign. So if they get their doors blown off, that's obviously going to be a red flag, I think, for the rest of the season. If they can win this game, I think they're going to generate enough momentum to get to that 6-win mark, possibly more. But, there's so many unknown variables here with the health of the team. Who's going to be available for November. We really don't know. So I think the bye week couldn't have come at a better time. But yeah, I mean, the optimistic fan in me says, yeah, they'll get to 6-6. They'll find a way. But for anyone that says they know what's going to happen, you're lying. And I just think momentum. Can this team generate some positive momentum? Because if they can, I think they can ride that to at least getting 6 wins. But if they get buried in that first game back, I think it's going to be pretty tough to overcome.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, if nothing else. Let's talk about basketball. You saw the scrimmage. Rutgers ultimately falls short, but one thing that I was blown away by, not that I was blown away because I didn't expect it, but the talent is 100% based on that anyway, as advertised. It looks like to me. I mean, these are guys that are going to make difficult shots, create things on their own when there's nothing there. Dylan Harper looked to me, he's still kind of got a baby face, but he looks like, in stature, like a grown man out there. I mean, he doesn't look like a freshman in that way. Now, there's going to be freshman moments, maybe. I mean, we know how things happen, but even the supporting cast that was around them, draining shots and things, it looks really great. Now, I want to pick your brain a little and just generally, one thing I've been kind of worried about is that, the post play, the 5 spot. We, didn't go out and get a transfer. We lose Cliff, have some young guys there. We did have a huge deficit in rebounding against St. John's. Martini came in, looked like he could crash the boards to some extent and played physical. But that's the one thing that kind of gives me pause about this team where, everybody wants to fly to the moon. I'm excited. I got a season ticket. I'm going to be there. I'm excited as anybody. Ranked number 25, obviously preseason. Season starts this week. I'm excited. What's your general take on the team? Your, vague expectations, and do you share those concerns about, hey, we got some young players and we might have trouble on the post? Or is that one thing I heard from somebody was, hey, maybe in the Big Ten we don't have as great a showing as we thought because of the style of play, but once we get out into the tournament, it's faster and it's more guard based anyway, and that's kind of one of the big problems with Big Ten to at large play. What's your take in general? What's your thoughts? You excited, obviously, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, no, it's some really good points you made, and I think just in terms of this team, I think the chemistry. How are they going to gel? How are roles going to be filled? And how is Pico going to be able to manage all that just in terms of pushing the right buttons? I think it's a very different team in the sense of, other than Dylan and Ace, I mean, minutes more or less are kind of up for grabs, where you have a lot of different guys that could warrant minutes. But I almost think it's going to change game to game based on situations, foul trouble, matchup opponent, all those different things. So I think there's going to be more for Pico to have to do in terms of course, there'll be kind of a set rotation, but I think game to game, you could see definitely like Jordan Durkak playing 29 minutes in the exhibition. I don't think that that's going to be his average, but I think there could be some games where he plays like that much. And then there's going to be other games where, Martini was in foul trouble, Jay Will was in foul trouble. They'll play more. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all that comes together. My 2 reasons for confidence is that this will work is that all the grad transfers, all the veterans that came, they knew what they signed up for. They wanted to be part of a situation where your 2 best players are heralded freshmen. So it takes a certain kind of mentality, maturity to accept that, and I think you saw, between Martini, Hayes, and Durkak, these are guys that are gamers, they play hard and they're willing to play their role. So I think that is extremely encouraging. And then I think with Dylan and Ace, it's their buy-in, right? It's their buy-in in terms of we know their offensive talent. How committed are they to playing within the team concept and defensively? Because they both have a lot of potential defensively. And if they can rise up and they can learn this system, Rutgers could be a very, very good defensive team. They could be by far the most balanced team we've ever seen at Rutgers. So that's going to be something to watch. But I feel like all signs so far point to very positive returns and how everyone's approaching it. You talked about Dylan. I mean, his maturity at his age and just the way he talks to reporters, he's really impressive. And then Ace is just one of those guys, like he lives on a basketball court. All he knows is basketball, and he's just a unique talent. So I think, and Peichel even said it in his presser at Media Day, this team hasn't gotten punched in the mouth yet. So how are they going to respond to adversity? It's crazy. I mean, the most tenured Big Ten player is J-Mike on the team.
Yeah.
So if you look at that part, I mean, I get the concerns, the 5 for sure. It's certainly something to monitor and be concerned about. But I think at the same time, I think that it can be unique. And to your point about the style difference, yeah, I mean, there's probably, I think I talked about this with Joe Jackson recently on my pod, Big Ten preview, about half the teams are going to probably play 2 bigs at the same time. So how Rutgers handles those situations is going to be interesting. Lathan Somerville's a guy, I mean, I've seen him in practice twice. I'm just so high on him. I don't know how fast he'll be a contributor, but he's the kind of guy I look at. I think like 2 years from now, I think he's going to be the face of the program. I think he's that good, and that's like mature, and the way he spoke at Media Day. But I think if they can develop him, and he can be someone they can count on to some degree by February, it's really going to help the trajectory of this team. Agbole, his job is going to be to defend and rebound. If he could do that at a competent level, I think that's going to be enough. They're not going to need points out of the 5. And I think a big difference this year versus last year, no disrespect to Cliff, but he demanded a certain amount of kind of offensive attention that they don't have to worry about now at the 5, and they can spread the wealth to the perimeter, to all their different options. I think it makes them a lot less predictable, and it's going to make them, a lot more efficient from an attacking standpoint. They can do things differently. I think Tyson Acuff's an X factor with his team. If he can get healthy enough to get back in shape and be able to, be a scoring punch off the bench or whatever role he plays, that's a real key for them. But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns, but as you said, there's a lot of like obvious positives that I think people maybe in the national media are downplaying a little bit. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this team's covered, how this team handles adversity. But yeah, as a Rutgers fan, I mean, it's finally here, and it's unbelievable. It's going to be a roller coaster. Hopefully, more ups and downs.
Yes, that's what I'm hoping too. Aaron, before we totally wrap up, I mean, people know now, I'm sure, but let them know where they could find you, where your content is, and if they're interested in checking you out. Like you said, you're very consistent, and they can get a lot of good insight and content. You have a lot of great guests. Tell the people where you are. Tell them what's on the horizon for the show and where they can find you.
Yeah, so the Scarlet Faithful podcast on every podcast platform there is, Spotify, Apple, every other one. On YouTube, if you search the Scarlet Faithful or my name, you'll find me there. And obviously Twitter is a big account I have, Aaron_Breitman. And then, I have a Scarlet Faithful Facebook page. If you ever want to join that, I post a lot on the Rutgers fan pages on Facebook as well. I don't have a site anymore in terms of where I put the pod, but you can find me pretty much everywhere else. And I really appreciate you reaching out and having me on like this. And like I said, it's an honor to kind of be a voice of Rutgers fans. Not that everyone agrees with me all the time, and that's okay. That's better, right? I'm a big preacher on Rutgers fans. Fans in general have a right to express their opinions, especially in down times, and that's what leads to positive change. So we don't all have to agree. We should always obviously be respectful to each other and to the players and the coaches and everything. But I think when you have passion, it's you got to be being critical and passionate is a heck of a lot better than being indifferent. And we've seen this program where there's been plenty of reasons, that this athletic department over the years, football and basketball specifically, there was a lot of apathetic fans. There was a lot of just indifference and people checked out. And now there's a lot of excitement. When you rise up, it leads to more disappointing losses, right? And that's hard to take. Basketball, I fear, is going to be like every loss is losing the Super Bowl to certain fans. But, you have good college basketball teams that lose 10 to 12 games that make the Final Four. So I think the trajectory of this seems to be fascinating to watch. Football, of course, hopefully they can string some wins together in November. But we've been through a lot as fans, and I hope just whatever journey you're in, whether it's your first year, 10th year, 50th year, I'm a big believer in everyone has equal rights, equal, opinions. And I'm just happy to be part of it. And I love kind of riffing with fans when they give me their opinions. And even when they tell me I'm wrong, I'm open to it. So, but no, thank you so much for having me. It's been great, just our relationship over the years too. So you're doing an amazing job. You're one of my go-tos also. after games to see what your take is. So I think all of us just kind of collaborating and supporting each other, that's a really important thing. And yeah, to see kind of the way sports teams are covered now, it's fascinating. It's still kind of, I don't want to say infancy, but I think it's still developing. But I think having fan input is a great thing.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you coming on, Aaron. I appreciate, like I've thanked you many times before, giving me a shot on the banks and supporting me up to this point now. It's been great to collaborate with everybody and great to kind of contribute to this community. So having you on and sharing your story, I think, is just awesome. I benefited from it. I'm sure a lot of Rutgers fans benefited from it, and I really appreciate it. Guys, if you're out there and you're listening and you made it all the way to the end and you still haven't subscribed to this channel, please click that subscribe button. It's right down here. Click it. We have some more bells and whistles coming for you soon. There's been some approvals that I've gotten for YouTube, so that's good stuff. But click subscribe. We're trying to get to 1,000. And tune in. I'll have some basketball discussion. We'll talk about the upcoming football game, and there will be future collabs with Aaron, both on his channel and mine. So stay tuned to everything, and we'll talk to you soon. See you guys later.